You know, when different comic book writers take it upon themselves to continue certain story arcs that another writer had began, sometimes that comic book writer will keep things as the original writer and creator had intended. Sometimes they might tweak it here and there to add their own little special spice to it. But in the end, and usually sometimes the story elements might remain the same, might be changed up a bit, like I said, to tweak the story, to make it more, to give the newer writer more control, if you will, kind of make them feel like making it their own, but they're still adding on, things like that. So when you take several stories and you take three different writers, one writer basically kind of doing his own take on another story arc that another writer had done in less than 18 to 20 pages of an earlier issue, as well as being the same writer that continues on a story arc that an original head writer had intended to be the true future of the franchise, of the story, of the comic continuity, of the characters involved, then there's no doubt you're going to have a lot of comparisons and a lot of questions will get arised. For example, there was a writer for issue 29 of Sonic the Hedgehog by Archie Comics by the name of Angelo. Now, Angelo did the main story in issue 29 called Steel Belted Sally. This was the first time, spoiler alert, that Sally had ever been roboticized. Any of the main cast had been roboticized. Well, with the exception of Sonic, that is. The exception of Sonic, with the exception of Sonic and Knuckles, with those being the exceptions, this is the first time any of the non-game characters, if you will, got roboticized. The SatAM characters, if you will. This is the first time this has ever happened in a story. Now, Angelo basically did something that a lot of fans, when they compare it to Ian Flynn's take on Sally being roboticized, which has become known as the Mecha Sally arc, which spanned from basically the end, from the last page of issue 230, all the way to issue 247, as well as about maybe 4 or 5 or 6 issues of Sonic Universe in between, basically being almost 2 years, basically comprising altogether of basically combined together, comprising of almost 2 years worth of story arc. A lot of people might say that Angelo did a better job. He basically did everything that Ian Flynn, I guess, had originally intended with the Mecha Sally arc, and its 17-plus run. Basically, it's nearly 2-year run. Like I said, if you take several of the issues of Sonic Universe, basically 4 to 6 issues worth, that Ian Flynn originally intended to do. And basically, a lot of fans will say Angelo accomplished that in less than 18 to 20 pages of the main story of the 29th issue. Yeah. That's basically what he did. And a lot of fans would agree that is what Ian Flynn should have done, even if he intended to keep this going for several issues. He should have done something that made it quick and simple and not drag on so long. But then again, some fans would look at what Ian Flynn did and his take on roboticizing Sally and say that this was necessary not just for Sally's character, but it was necessary, as Ian Flynn put it, to break the freedom fighters and build them back up. See, Ian Flynn's original intention, from what I understand, was to kind of get the new generation, the new subscribers, the new readers of the book to know who the freedom fighters were by doing this to them, so that in the end, not only would you have the redesigns that we got, but the newer fans and even the older fans and readers and subscribers would have an appreciation as to the fact that these characters had to dig themselves up from the gutter, or in the case of the older fans, dig themselves back up from the gutter redeem themselves and show that no matter how hard you knock them down or even knock them out, they're going to get back up and fight. And people would applaud Ian Flynn for that. In fact, a lot of fans have. But there's also a lot of fans that look at it and say, yeah, that's great and everything, but what did you accomplish in the end? Nothing. Nothing really. It's like I said in a written text that I did. I said basically all we had was rinse and repeat of the same scenario for 17 issues of the main comic. Now, with that said, where people say Angelo kind of got it right was basically you got Sally roboticized. You basically had a beginning, a middle, and an end. You had what was needed. You had the plot. You had the setup. It's like you had the appetizer. You had the meat, and you had the dessert. You had that full course meal in less than 20 pages. And that's why a lot of people would compare and say that, yeah, it was a little bit more humorous, it was a little more lighthearted, it was more Saturday based, but people would say Steel Belted Sally did something in less than 20 pages than what the 17 issue deal of Mecha Sally did. I mean, they had a beginning, middle, and end. They had a reason for why she wanted to be a reason for her being roboticized. And, they had a reason for her being roboticized. They had unwillingly turning against her friends. And you had a resolution, her being restored. You had all that in less than 20 pages. And they look at that, a lot of fans, long-time fans, and even some newer fans look at that, and they probably think, well, why couldn't the Mecha Sally arc kind of be like that? Why couldn't they just get this done in less than 17 issues? Again, I think Ian Flynn's intentions were good, but I don't think he realized that he didn't have to go this far with it. I always indicate the fact that Ian Flynn originally, I think, this was originally my opinion on it, and I still stick to it. I still stick to this opinion of mine, and that is, I feel Ian Flynn wanted to have his own magnum opus. He wanted to have his own masterpiece. He wanted to have his own, how do I put this? He wanted to have that one epic story that he could be remembered by. You see, when Ken Penders was on board with the book, the one story a lot of people associate Penders with the most, story arc-wise anyway, is Endgame. And a lot of people would consider that is Ken Penders' magnum opus, that is his masterpiece. And he did that in less than he did that with just 4 issues to spare. And he did that within the confines, I should say. He did that within the confines, I should say, of 4 issues. I do apologize if I'm stammering a little bit. It's 8:21 in the morning. I've been up for a little while. But anyway, he did that within the confines of 4 issues. And I think Ian Flynn looked at that, maybe a little envious, and thought, hey, I can do better. I can do way better. Well, I'll give him credit. He tried. But the thing is, he didn't have an ending. He didn't have a true resolution. Now, I will give Ian Flynn credit for the fact that he, along with the rest of the creative staff, didn't probably have any freaking idea that the lawsuit was going to happen behind the scenes, and that certain characters that were a necessary part of the story arc were going to be taken out. I don't think he planned on that to happen, so I'll give him that. But even so, like I've said before, he could have found a way to still do the story arc the way he originally intended, even if he had to alternate it a little bit by using newer characters that he himself would have to create. But the point is, folks, the point is, when people compare the two, they would say that Angelo did a better job with the Mecha Sally arc. Well, his Mecha Sally take, I should say, the Steel Belted Sally deal. They say he did a better job. Because, like I said, you look at it and the fact that there was a reasoning, there was a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's all that you needed. The reasoning for her robotization, real simple. They had found a de-roboticizer. Sonic, along with Dulcie, which, by the way, issue 29 was Dulcie's comic book debut, found a de-roboticizer on a hovercraft that they had caused to crash, that was chasing them, and they had caused to crash. They had found a de-roboticizer, a portable de-roboticizer on a hovercraft, on a Robotnik hovercraft, and decided that this could be the opportunity they need to learn about Robotnik's operations, maybe learn what they need to build their own de-roboticizer to restore people that have been roboticized. So how does this go? Well, basically, they come up with the idea, but Sally's the one that says, I'll be the one that does it. I'll be the one that lets myself be roboticized. And they have everything well planned out, everything strategized and well planned out. They even have Rotor create a neuro overrider that he places in Sally's ear that would allow her to regain her free will even after roboticization. However, when I talk about them having a middle and an unwilling betrayal, like I said earlier, that's what happens here. Because as Sally's playing her part to allow herself to be captured and roboticized, unsuspectedly, the neuro overrider falls out of her ear, and thus, when she's roboticized, she ends up losing her free will. But does Robotnik hesitate in using her? No. He knows that if she's in the vicinity, so are the other freedom fighters, so he immediately uses her to go capture them, and then moments after Sonic, and take them to the roboticizing room, or the roboticizing chamber, where they are placed in several different roboticizing pods. Now, like I said, Angelo also had a resolution, an ending. True, it was a Deus Machina ending, but he had a resolution and an ending. And that resolution and ending was Dulcie being left behind with the de-roboticizer, the portable de-roboticizer, bringing it with her because for some reason, and we learned this later on down the line, she has this feeling that the plan may fail, which it did. She notices outside the window of Robotnik's headquarters what's about to happen. She crashes through it with the portable de-roboticizer, uses it to zap Sally back to normal just before she's about to press the button to roboticize her friends. So in a way, basically right then and there, you had your resolution and your ending as Deus Machina as it is. And it was kind of bittersweet, a lighthearted bittersweet, because Sally did apologize for not getting the job done like she thought she was going to. But they had a little bit of a lighthearted laugh afterwards when Dulcie jokes around, hey, it's not your fault. Robotnik's the one that didn't get the job done. That's why I fired him. Basically joking at the fact that she blew fire at Robotnik and Snively. The point I'm making is they had that right then and there, within those confines of 20 pages, you had a beginning, resolution, and beginning, middle, and end. And when you compare it, when a lot of fans compare it to the Mecha Sally arc, some will say that Angelo did it better. They will say he did it better and that Ian Flynn tried. Ian Flynn had good intentions, but in the end, it backfired. It backfired to the point that, let's be honest, Ian Flynn didn't really have an idea of how he was going to end it, especially with the lawsuits playing a major, crucial part in this. You know, the behind-the-scenes lawsuits, like I said, I'll give Ian Flynn credit, didn't really help his cause whatsoever, because the characters and elements that he needed that were necessary to his story that he needed were taken away from him. So basically, he had to come up with a different solution. One of his original ideas was to go back and use a creature of Robotnik, so a robotic creature or robotic organic creature or plant of Robotnik's called the Krazood. his plan was to use that as possibly an antidote to restore Sally back to normal. But he didn't follow through on that, because at the end of 247, we ended up into the first crossover between Sonic and Mega Man. So that right there, and thus after that 12-issue crossover, which spanned the main comic, universe, and Mega Man, that's when we ended up getting our soft retcon reboot, if you will, of the universe, of the characters. That's when we ended up getting it. And that's why I think when fans compare the two, like I said, there will be fans that like what Ian did and like the intentions he had for it, which were good, I will admit, even though I didn't really read the arc until it was all said and done, because I particularly didn't like what happened with Sally and what he was doing. I'll be honest, I wasn't particularly a fan of the concept, okay? I'll give Ian Flynn credit. His intentions were good. The start of it, the first, I'd say, couple of issues show potential and promise, but in the end, it just didn't flow right. It just didn't feel right. And I think that's why when I read Steel Belted Sally in issue 29, I look at that and I say, this writer, Angelo, did a better job within the span of just 20 pages than Ian Flynn did, with all due respect. And I think Ian Flynn knows that. But speaking of Ian Flynn, if it's not trying to do your own take on something that was done basically within the span of 20-something pages, like I said, that was done within the span of 20-something pages, how about the fact that you try to continue on somebody else's story that they created, that they had originally wrote and created for the comic? You see, back during Ken Pender's last run with the book, Ken Penders had decided to do something called Mobius Years Later. Now, he did this in between, he did these as backup stories between, I think, 100, between the issues that took place after 125 or so. He decided to do the story arc that, like I said, took place before or after the 125th issue, and it was used as backup stories in some of the comics. Now, I liked it. I'm not going to deny it. I liked it to a point that it was something different. We got to see, potentially what the future would be. And when I say potentially, because when Ken Penders originally came up with this idea, his plan, from what I understand, was to make this Mobius 25 years later future a true part of the continuity. In other words, Ken Penders had intended that this would be the future. This would be the result of the Freedom Fighter after the Freedom Fighters defeated Eggman, Robotnik. This is what would happen. It wasn't and there was no what if scenario. There was no what ifs or, this is another time, another place kind of scenario. No. This was basically, from what Ken Penders had intended, was going to be the true future, the true future. That this was basically part of continuity. This was a true part of the continuity. That this is what's going to happen, not possibly, not what if or anything. That this was going to be exactly what happens. And here's what's funny. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I thought it was something. I thought it was good. I thought it was something different. It was basically more of a slice of life kind of deal that took place 25 years later in the future. It introduced us to a new character in Lala Sue, the daughter of Knuckles and Julie Sue. It introduced us to the kids of Sonic, Manic and Sonya, which basically plays on Manic and Sonya from Sonic Underground. So it introduced us to them, in a sense. It introduced us to these new characters and everything. And like I said, it was more of a soap opera-ish kind of slice of life story arc backup that took place in the future. Now, what's funny about this is Ken Penders ended this on a cliffhanger. You see, the plot was something was going on with something was going on with the weather that was kind of slowly destroying the world. And the reason the world was being destroyed, it was because of something that Sonic had done originally in the past. And I think that was defeating Eggman, or he had done something when he defeated Eggman that caused the world to start shaping up and breaking apart as it was happening. So he opted to go back to the past and try to fix it, but the cliffhanger was he ended up lost in space and time. Well, Ian Flynn gave us resolution to that, because when Ian Flynn came on board, he decided to finish it up. He finished it up by acknowledging that what was responsible for this was Shadow. Or I guess that's what we can assume. That Shadow was somehow part of this. And he ended up being, and that the result of it was he had become king, married Sally, and that basically he had turned what essentially was a utopia into sort of a iron-fisted utopia, where everybody basically bowed to his every whim, paid tribute and worship to Maria, you name it. Basically, he was a tyrant. But what was funny about this is the twist in all this was the fact that he knew about the previous timeline as well did Sally. See, Sally, him, Sonic, and even Knuckles and Tails and a bit of Lawless Sue, remembering a bit of the old timeline of the old world, they knew about it. So basically this kind of confirmed that Shadow had been the one that caused the rift. Anyway, long story short, Ian Flynn brought resolution to that. The ending was Shadow was defeated, Sonic and Sally were brought back together in the future. Case closed. Or so we think. Because you see, when Ian Flynn did this, he had also made the announcement to several fans that this wasn't going to be as Ken Penders originally intended. Instead, that this was going to be a what if now. That this was going to be looked at not as a true part of the future, it was not going to be a true part of the future. It was not going to be a true part of the continuity. Not a this is what will happen part. Basically, Ian Flynn had come out and said that this would now be looked at as a what if, a alternate timeline, another place, another time deal. Now, I can't say that Ken Penders was cool with it or not, but Ian Flynn basically inserted this, and there were several people that backed him up on it as well, even to the point that to truly emphasize what he was saying, he did another Mobius Years story arc, this time called Mobius 30 Years Later, that basically took place 5 years after the last story that he did, after the last story, and basically introduced us to the new generation of freedom fighters, which were basically the children of the current freedom fighters, led by Lawless Sue, the daughter of Knuckles. But it was also part of but this was done in conjunction as part of also a Silver story arc. It was another Silver Sonic Universe arc that was combined with a Mobius Years Later, with the continuation of the Mobius Years Later arc. That basically, it was a Silver story, but it was also a Mobius Years Later story. But what was interesting about this, Ian's take on it, was the fact that, what was interesting about this, especially Ian's take on it, was the fact that we kind of got a hint as to who might be the traitor that caused Silver's world to be in desolation. So, anyway, long story short, Ian Flynn had inserted the fact, even with the continuation, that this was a what-if deal. This was a alternate universe, another time, another place deal. Which is a big difference when you compare it to Ken Penders' original take on the Mobius Years Later arc. Because basically, if you go back to the in your face 48-page special, it indicates right then and there that this is supposed that Ken Pender's original concept was supposed to be a true part of the future, was supposed to be a true part of the continuity. It just never happened. It just never would be the case anymore, thanks to Ian Flynn. And some might say Ian did a good job at doing that because of the fact that pretty much you're assuming, or not assuming, but you're basically inserting the fact that Sonic and Sally will be together no matter what. This will happen, that will happen, no matter what. And I think Ian Flynn looked at that as not just as a fan, but as a comic book writer, and was like, no, we need to still that can't happen. This cannot be a true part of the continuity, because we need to basically say we need to change it up and say this is a what if deal. This is a what could be deal, not a what will be deal. So that's what we got with the last Mobius Years Later our story. So when you do a comparison, I will say this. When I compare Angelo's Steel-Belted Sally story from issue 29 that took place within the confines of 18 to 20 pages, I will say that I think Angelo did the better job. Not saying Ian Flynn didn't have any good intentions or any goodwill with his 17-plus issue Mecha Sally arc. I'm not saying that he did. I'm not saying he didn't, because he did. But I don't think he had any idea he was going to end up with a situation like he did. I really don't. So overall, I have to say that Angelo did a better job, and I think Ian Flynn, he knows that. As far as Mobius Years Later, you can toss that up in the air. You can do a toss-up with that. You can pretty much say, yeah, I liked Ken Pender's concept. I wish Ian Flynn would have kept it that way. Or you could be on Ian Flynn's side and say, well, I like Ian Flynn's take on it because now we're not really sure. So it's kind of a toss-up between the two. I mean, I believe Ken Penders wanted to make it a true part of continuity because he pretty much figured that if this would be one of his last major stories he would do, that he wanted to give the fans sort of a bittersweet ending, sort of an idea of what is going to happen, because maybe it's just me, but I believe maybe Ken Penders, I should say, felt that the comic wasn't going to last much longer. He probably didn't have any idea it was going to last basically about 130 issues more. I'm sure he didn't expect that, but it did. The point is, either Ken Penders knew that down the line the book was going to end, or it wasn't, or was going to last a little longer than he thought it would. I will say this. Ken Penders had a good idea, had good intentions, but if you look at it, good intentions, but had the comic ended maybe after, let's say, 125 or whatever, then, well, not 125, but after, let's say, 150 or whatever, then yeah, he had good intentions, and he was right in doing the Mobius Years Later arc, because at least we now know what was going to happen and what would be the result at the end. But if you look at it from Ian Flynn's perspective, you can kind of understand why he decided to do it the other way. He decided to go in the other direction. He realized that if they kept it the way Ken Penders had intended, then you're pretty much giving away the result of the battle between the Freedom Fighters and Eggman. There's no true, that basically, what's the point of reading the other issues or the other comics? So I give Ian Flynn credit for switching it up a little bit with the intention of now keeping people guessing as, will this be or will this not be the future? And I also give him credit for kind of switching it up to maybe making it more of an alternate timeline, alternate zone, whatever you want to call it. But again, to me, it's a toss-up between the two because I can understand the true intentions, the good intentions between both writers. Overall, when you compare the two, I say Ian Flynn's better at times of trying to continue a story from another writer and maybe adding his own perks, his own tweaks to it, his own style to it, maybe switching it up a bit to acknowledge that it's not a what will be, but a what if deal. I think when it comes to something like Mobius Years Later and continuing where Ken Penders left off, I think that's his strengths. When it comes to trying to do a story that someone had done in the confines, that someone had done basically about 200 issues prior, which was kind of funny because it's 201 issues later that this happens. But when you try to do something that's a little deeper, darker, mature, whatever you want to call it, complex, compared to the more simpler way that somebody else did it, yeah, your intentions might be good and everything, but in the end, sometimes you just might as well stick to doing something a little bit more different, something original. Because when you compare the other story that happened 200 issues prior, people will say that had the best beginning, middle, and end. So overall,